Hi, my name is Freddy Bello. I am a technical solutions architect at Cisco. Today, I would like to share with you an example on how to integrate SecureX with on-premises services using the remote configuration appliance. In this example, I will use the ASA RESTful API and some internal web services with observables. Using the remote configuration appliance, we can get observable from a custom security feed and then convert the data into network objects to create a dynamic blocking list on the fly inside the ASA. So let's get started. In here, you can see a small list with all the stuff we need to have in our environment. The first thing we need to have is our ASAs with the API enabled on it. Okay. Then we need to do the SecureX remote configuration in the orchestrator. This is a pretty simple task that we are going to do, and you will see in a moment. After that, we need to create some HTTP endpoint targets in our SecureX environment and link those targets to our remote configuration appliance. And finally, we need to create a workflow that use those targets and put some task to automate the creation of the list. Okay, so let me show you that. First thing is to make sure we have the REST API agent on it, okay? And so we have in here the actual image for the REST API and then the agent enabled on it. So good to go. Let me check if we have the HTTP server running. And then we have here the services enabled, and we are accepting HTTP connection over the management interface. And finally, let me check if we have the authentication properly set. And here we have the HTTP authentication using the local user databases. And finally, we have a username just for the ASA API key handling that we are going to use after in the SecureX platform. Okay, so at this time, we have anything that we need to go on the ASA theory. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to configure a remote appliance. I already have one, so let me show you what I have. You come to admin menu on the orchestrator, and then you go to remote configuration. In there, you can create a new remote appliance, but I will show you what it is inside. Okay, so the first thing is you assign a name to it. This is a label. You can assign a description, and you can assign an static IP address, or you can choose a DHCP delivered address. At the end of the day, the important thing is to have a DNS server and a gateway to allow the appliance to be able to reach the internet and the SecureX cloud. If for any reason the appliance will need a proxy to reach the internet, then you can use and set that configuration in here, right? So once you have that, basically the other thing that you need to do is to download the appliance. It is an OVA that you can deploy on VMware, and then deploy the appliance with all that, okay? But don't worry, if you don't get what to do, all the steps are pretty well documented in the help. So you can come to the help, you will find a section for remote configuration, and then you have every single step that you need to take into consideration in order to have a fully functional remote appliance configuration. Okay, so once you have the appliance deployed, you can see that it will show connected, and then you will have a green bar on the side of the name of the appliance. And once you have that, it means that this appliance is able to reach this actual internet address in this specific port. It is important to keep in mind that this is an outgoing connection. So in this case, the appliance talks to the SecureX cloud through this address, and basically that's the whole thing that it needs to be able to control on-premise devices. Okay, so that's it. The remote appliance is very simple. Just basically come to remote configuration and follow the step in there. All right, so now we need to configure some targets. Let me show you what I have in here right now. You come to targets menu, and then you have the new target button here, but I already have those targets, so let me show you what I have. The first thing is I have an ASA target, and this target is an HTTP endpoint because I plan to use the ASA API agent. The other thing that I need to configure in here is to tie key to authentication to this target. In my case, I said you need an authentication key, and the authentication key will be this one. What is inside the authentication key? Basically, the username and password that I define in the local database. And the other critical piece is to link together my remote appliance with this target. What this means is anytime SecureX want to talk to the ASA target, it needs to reach the remote appliance and instruct the remote appliance to execute some orders in my target, right? And finally, I will define the protocol I'm going to use, HTTPS in this case. I define the IP address of my device. And if I need to have anything beside that, a specific port on a specific path in the connection, I can define that in here. And this is an important one because if you use self-signed certificates, then you should disable this verification in order to avoid some errors. Besides that, if you have any proxy to reach the target, then you can define the proxy information in here. I have my threat intel target, that is our web services, and this is a simple one. Again, it's an HTTP endpoint. It have a label with a name, but in this case, this one doesn't require any key. So I keep this as a true because no account keys are needed. I tie this one to the remote appliance the same way I did for the ASA because this is an internal services. Finally, I define the protocol and the host name in this case for my web services. Okay. Same way, I disable the server certificate validation. Okay. So that's it. Now that we test the basic and we know that our remote appliance is working properly with our on-prem ASAs, let me show you the actual use case that we made in order to prove this concept and to show you the actual workflow. Okay. What is the thing here? In this case, I'm connecting first to the web services itself. Okay. And this connection is using the target that we defined in the previous step, the custom threat intel feed. And this target will be the source of all the information that we need. So it's a get request to this URI in here, right? So once we got that URI, we're going to test if we have any data. So the first thing we need to make sure is that we have any response, because if we don't have any response, why we need to bother the ASA API requesting token and that kind of stuff. So if we get data, then we start to do the whole thing to connect to the ASA, retrieve a token, manipulate the data, and so on and so forth. So in this case, this is very similar to the workflow that I showed you previously. So you get a token, right? And then with that token, you will save the information in a variable, and you will create a network group name, okay? We are going to delete the whole current net object on the fly because we want to refresh the information. And finally, we're going to split the information that we get from the token. And this is an interesting one. For every single line that I get from there, I will create a label, okay? I will create a payload to that object, and then I will create the actual object at the end. And what that means, so I'm removing with this all the dots from the IP address and replace those dots with that undercase, okay? Then I will create a label with that information, and then I will create a payload tying all the things together. If you remember, this is the actual format that I use for the JSON keeper value that we use to create the first object in the other workflow. So the difference here is that I'm using some variables to create this on the fly to whatever number of IP addresses that I have. Finally, I pass that payload to the network object API URI, and then I will link that new object to an object group that I already have in the ASA. And in this case, we are going to use the patch verb from the API call. And then I will save the configuration. So let's try to run this one to see what we got, okay? So what happened in every single iteration? So as I told you, we take the input information and then we modify the label by replacing the dot with underscore sign for every single IP, right? Then create the label. What that means is I'm going to use this value here, and then I will output a label for that. And then the payload as it is basically to use the information for the IP, but also a label that tied to the actual object. Okay. And finally, we are going to create the object at the ASA. Okay. And then we are going to attach that to the actual network object group. And then we have the configuration saved. So this went through. So let's check that out in our device. So run object. And you see all the objects that we send from the device, object group, and we will see the actual object group that we can use now to tie to an ACL. Okay, so that's basically the whole process, and you can now schedule this workflow to run several times during the day in order to keep your ACLs fresh and up to date with the proper threading tail from your custom sources. Okay.